Have it out with Galloway. There's never been a better time, a more important time to do so. You can, of course, appear on this show on the video wall, but first you've got to listen to me. I'm here to tell you that the wave of elections, either happening or imminent across the Western world, are a direct reflection of the utter failure of the foreign policies of Western governments. Of course, the public don't automatically see it as a reflection of foreign policy, but the impact of foreign policy on the national economies in Europe, on the national political, even cultural situations in Western countries, including in the United States, is a direct correlation. Let me give you one example. Germany's government is hanging by a thread between the two parties to it, the so-called Social Democrats of little soldier Schultz and bonkers Baerbock, the most stupid foreign minister ever to hold office in any developed country. Between the two parties, they don't have even 20% of the popular vote. They were routed by their opponents in the European Parliament elections a week or two ago. And the reason is Germany's foreign policy. Germany's foreign policy in the last 24 years, but even more particularly, Germany's foreign policy over the last 2 years. When Germany blew up its own pipeline, cutting itself off from regular, plentiful, and cheap natural gas from Russia, which had helped to build the German economy into an economic powerhouse, the economic powerhouse, across the whole of Europe. It was a self-lacerating, self-defacing, even perhaps suicidal policy. Of course, the Germans don't admit that they did it, but they haven't made any effort to find out who did, and on the principle of cui bono, who benefits, it's obvious that the United States and its satraps were involved in the blowing up of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This has led to a collapse of the German economy. I was in Germany many times over the last winter, and it was a long and cold one, I can assure you. Public buildings not heated, restaurants, bars not heated, people's heating bills at home making it necessary for them to cut their own heating off. It was a self-defacing policy, and it was all to please the United States in its efforts to confront and defeat the Russian Federation. Sanctions from Germany on Iran, sanctions driven by Germany across the whole European Union on Iran, sanctions against China, sanctions against Russia. All of these foreign policy decisions done on the orders of the United States have beggared the people of Germany. So when the people of Germany rise up and vote against their government, they may not directly be doing so because of Iran, because of China, because of Russia, but they are doing so because of the impact on the national economy in Germany of those foreign policy choices. I could go right across the European Union and point to similar self-defacements. Britain is in the middle of a general election. Foreign policy is vitally impacting on the outcome of that election. How so? Well, there are millions of people in Britain who absolutely abhor the massacres, the genocide that are taking place in Gaza. They're watching them on their phones. They're watching them on their screens. And they are utterly bereft at the fact that both the British government and the so-called opposition, the next British government, one must presume, both of them are supporting Netanyahu's slaughter. So millions of people who would normally have voted for the Labour opposition party are not going to do so. There's a rise and rise of small parties and of independents, and the impact of that will be felt on the 4th of July. The Times told us this week that the percentage of people voting for the two big parties will be the lowest since the Second World War. Once upon a time, at its height, 88% of the British people voted Conservative or Labour. It's going to be well short of 50% this time. And the reason is foreign policy. Joe Biden has lost millions of votes from the Democratic base. Millions who always voted Democrat are now not going to vote for Genocide Joe. The fact that Zion Don Trump is the alternative, the main alternative, of course poses a problem. People may not vote for Trump, but millions will not vote for Biden that would otherwise have been expected to do so. So Joe Biden's unwavering, unlimited military, political, financial, diplomatic, and propaganda support for Netanyahu is going to lose him the American presidential election. You see my point? Some fools try to say that elections shouldn't be about foreign policy. They should be about domestic affairs. They call it foreign interference if anyone raises those foreign policies. But in truth, these two things cannot be separated. You cannot cut off one from the other, as all kinds of leaders in the Western world are about to find out. It is Have It Out with Galloway. Let me have it out right now with some of our guests on the video wall. Let's start having it out with the guests on the video wall now. David Atherton in London is the first to have it out with Galloway. David, where are you? What would you like to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I want to ask you is a lot of Labour and Workers' Party candidates in the election are standing on Gaza platforms. And not one of yours, but another independent person is also talking about the Sikh massacre in 1984. I don't ever recall, Australian, French, or American politics being mentioned before in our general elections. So, do you think that we're importing sectarianism into the general election? And if we look at Northern Ireland, it's not a healthy thing, is it?
Well, I'm afraid sectarianism in the north of Ireland is entirely a homegrown thing. Don't go blaming the foreigners for that. They're here because we were there, David. The reason there are millions of people who are either directly or more often indirectly descended from the Indian subcontinent is because with 60,000 British officials, we ruled all of India. Now India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and for that matter, Sri Lanka. 500 or 600 million people were ruled by 60,000 British officials, and their country was looted. When we arrived in Bengal, it was the richest place in the whole world. And when we left Bengal, it was the poorest place in the whole world. And you don't have to be Einstein to work out what happened in between. We then asked, in the beginning of the 1960s, Enoch Powell, you may remember him, Enoch Powell went on a tour of the former empire, beseeching, begging, and bribing the citizens of Commonwealth countries to come to Britain to fill the post-war labour shortage. I'm just giving you that as a backdrop to the issue that you raise. We're talking about the Sikh massacre in 1984. Why wouldn't you talk about a Sikh massacre in which thousands of people were killed in a Commonwealth country amongst voters who are themselves Sikhs. What's unusual about that? If an American politician was looking for votes in Boston, you can be sure he'd talk about Britain's occupation of Ireland. That's entirely normal. However much you try and inoculate yourself from it, David, we are an imperialist power. We had a vast empire and we robbed it blind. Then we took people from that empire and brought them here to drive our buses, sweep our floors, work as porters in our hospitals, and so on. So there's no point in crying about it now, David. It's spilt milk. You just have to deal with the fact that there are plenty of Sikhs in England, and they are rightly angry about the way in which they have been treated back in 1984 and now, and right now, in their legitimate demands for autonomy within India and so on. So that's the point I was trying to make in my monologue, that you cannot separate foreign policy from domestic policy, because foreign policy directly impacts on your national economy, on your national political scene, and, as you've just indicated or inferred, on your cultural scene too. Let me go to number 4, David Vance in Northern Ireland. David, welcome.
Hi, George. Thanks very much for the chance to have a chat with you. I'll tell you what it is, George. What I think in an election is that it's really good to have all kinds of opinions and views discussed. That's the essence, I think, of an effective democracy, which we don't really have, because we've got the uni party in the form of Labour and Conservatives trying to manipulate debate, and it's pretty horrendous to see. But I wondered, what did you think of the fact, George, that as far as I understand, you are being targeted in your constituency, as indeed are people like Nigel Farage, by an organisation called Hope Not Hate, who seem very hell-bent to try and get Labour in and you out, and for that matter, Nigel Farage not in. What do you think of these organisations, them particularly, George, and what do you think their agenda really is?
Well, that's a terrific question. There are some legal limits to what I can say, because we've reported them to the police. The police have opened a case. We have reported them to the Electoral Commission and to the Charities Commission for this reason, that while they say they're called Hope Not Hate, David, they're actually really hate not hope. They are seeking to generate hate and definitely not engender any hope. And it is entirely partisan. It is partisan in terms of party politics, but it's also ideologically partisan. But it's a breach of the law, because these people are funded by the British government. We've got a situation where the British government funds a charity which makes grants to a so-called impartial campaigning company of the same name, and that company targets political individuals and parties to the benefit of the people who funded it. So most of the people who fund Hope Not Hate, the charity, are very prominent funders of the Israel lobby in Britain, plus £160,000 from the British government. We've got the British government, therefore, indirectly funding campaigns against its opponents in a British general election. You've got prominent funders, massive, nearly £1 million a year, going into this charity, who are also funders of most of the architecture of the Israel lobby in Britain. Their goal is to defeat people that they think are a threat to the Uni Party, because the Uni Party suits them and their funders very well, because nothing much changes if one cheek or the other cheek of the same backside gets 5 or 10 or more years in power. as long as they can ensure that when it goes back to the other cheek, nothing actually changes. So they're targeting me because of my 50 years of activism on the subject of Palestine. They're targeting Nigel Farage because he's a big threat to the Uni Party. He's neither Labour nor Conservative. He hates them both with equal vigour, and he draws votes from both with equal enthusiasm. So they don't want new actors, David, on the stage. They prefer to keep Tweedledee and Tweedledum as alternatives that can be depended on to support Britain's role in the world at this moment in time. That role in the world, I'm sorry to say, is as basically an auxiliary, and quite a lowly auxiliary, of the United States empire. It's ironic, I was talking with the last caller about the fact that once upon a time we had an empire so vast that on it the sun never set. Although, as my Irish grandfather said, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. So we've gone from ruling a third of the world, a quarter of the world's territory, a third of the world's population, to being the tail of the American dog. But the Uni Party would rather be the tail of the American dog than to see a Britain independent, making its own way in the world and forming foreign policies that will benefit itself. Let me see. Sameh Habeeb is a British-Palestinian journalist and is a candidate in this general election. Sameh, very welcome indeed. You're standing for my party, should declare that right up at the top. But what do you think of my essential thesis that Britain's domestic politics simply cannot be separated from our foreign policies, and that foreign policies, whether it's in the Punjab or in Palestine, are directly impacting on the British general election?
Well, that is certain, and I've been arguing with a lot of people on my campaign, talking to locals about this. A lot of the residents, for example, in Ealing North, they are not aware that our government is funding Israel, the military, the army of Israel, through the military flights from Cyprus, the spy flights worth of millions, plus the logistics support. We've seen how Rishi Sunak flew in within days after the 7th of October to offer all kind of support to Israel. We've seen how even the opposition, there is an opposition, the Bloc of Wood, as you say, Keir Starmer, was also offering this endless support, whether within the opposition, even agreeing with the Conservatives on the support for Israel. It is very interlinked, and I don't see a differential. We should be putting this money in the NHS, the infrastructure, and other things locally instead of supporting Israel. And sadly, this has been there for many, many years. Maybe this Gaza genocide is bringing this to a spotlight because, like it or not, it's our government plus the American government that are sustaining this Israeli apartheid state. Although I always argue and say that in the UK, as you know, we don't have a foreign policy. It's attached to what's happening in Washington, D.C. Even when this genocide took place and we saw David Cameron saying that we're going to recognize a Palestinian state, this came days after Secretary Blinken announcing that the Americans are thinking about recognizing a Palestinian state. And we've seen many European states are doing this. So whether it's Europe, whether it's the UK, the foreign policy is always made in Washington when it comes to Palestine. And it's very interlinked with our local politics here. This is why I've been telling my voters here, please, when you go and vote on the 4th of July, make sure to vote for the alternative, which is the Workers' Party, the party that is the only party that is speaking out for Palestine, unlike other candidates. And I think we've got a chance to do well in this election.
It is obviously strictly come dancing, and there's no doubt who's the leading partner on the dance floor. It's the United States, and therefore Britain often does things that are not directly in their own interests, and sometimes things that are directly against their own interests. Just in the last few days, for example, the warplanes of two countries, only two, nobody else wanted to do it, the American and British Air Forces bombed an island off the coast of Yemen, causing loss of life and damage. By this kind of unilateral or bilateral US-UK, the Anglo-Saxon alliance, two of the Five Eyes, by this kind of warlike attack on Arab countries, on Muslim countries, how can it be expected that there will be no impact on the voting intentions of Muslim voters in Britain? You think you can kill Muslims around the world by sanction and war, but Muslims in Britain are going to be unmoved by that? It's a very stupid idea.
Indeed, indeed. And I disagree with the assumption that it is sectarian for the Muslims in this country to vote against the Labour Party because of Palestine. It's totally the wrong assumption. The Labour Party, as you know, waged this war in Afghanistan and war in Iraq. In the time of Tony Blair, they killed millions of people. Okay. And what did we do as Muslims in this country? We keep voting blindly for the Labour Party, but this year is totally different. And I've seen it. We talked to a lot of people. People are aware. They're educated by the social media. It's no longer the corporate media or the national media or the government media in this country that control the narrative. It's out of control. This is why Muslims in this country are now educated. Some of them would still vote for maybe Labour. It's a small minority because there are a lot of sellouts, I call them, within the Muslim community who are knocking doors on behalf of Labour and turning a blind eye on what's happening in Palestine. Well, I've seen those sellouts in the parliament, you know, voting against the ceasefire and offering their support to Keir Starmer, the block of wood, and what he said on LBC radio about supporting a famine and a genocide. But this year is different. As I said, we've talked to a lot of Muslims in this country, and not only me, other candidates, I've been talking to them. There's a unity in voting against the Labour Party. The Workers' Party will do well in many seats. The Independents and the Greens would do well in some seats. So this is a message that would be taken for the next elections as well, that the Muslims in this country will not vote for granted for the Labour Party, the war party, anymore.
I mean, people vote for their interests. That's what a democracy is. If a party came along that said they were going to dramatically damage your interests, you wouldn't vote for them. Well, there are millions of people in this country who declare that amongst their interests are the fate of their co-religionists and even compatriots back home. And it isn't just Muslims. Sikhs, for example, are furious in a neighboring area to you, in Southall, furious that having had a Sikh MP, Labour MP, who didn't do very much, by the way, but at least he was representative of the Labour voters in that he was a Sikh. He's been elbowed out up to the House of Lords, and a completely unrelated Starmer stooge has been imposed as the Labour candidate. The Sikhs are rising up in Southall and in places in the West Midlands about the way in which their problems are ignored by the British state also.
Yeah, indeed. You know, even you know what happened in 1984, the genocide against the Sikh community, and I was very vocal as well of denouncing what happened. They're killing thousands of the Sikh people and still not recognizing the genocide. So as Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians, we share the sorrow and the support for the Sikh community. And I'm very glad that within the Workers' Party, we have a lot of Sikh candidates, whether in my neighboring constituency in Southall and in Windsor and in Hammersmith. Even we're supporting them, and I'm rallying support for these Sikh candidates, Palestinian support in many seats in London. It's one cause and it's one party, and the other party as well that is adopting the same policies, whether against the Palestinians who are being massacred for many years, and even the Sikhs who were massacred in the 80s in the Golden Temple incident and the genocide. So it's very clear that we are united here, whether the Palestinians, the Muslims, or the Arabs, and even the Sikh community in mitigating and challenging the establishment here. It's going to be a very interesting election this year, and I'm very hopeful we will get a hung parliament. You know, the pollsters are not talking truth about what's happening. Even as you know, in your seat a few days ago, you got one journalist from Politics UK calling you saying you're gonna get below 1%, and then another poll came saying you're gonna be winning it. Same in my seat, another seat. There's a massive blackout against the Workers' Party and other candidates because we do not adopt the narrative of the establishment and its main two parties. And I hope in this election we're going to break this two-party system. It's going to be a lesson for both parties. Trust me, George.
Yeah, well, luckily, nobody depends on the mainstream media anymore. The other media at our disposal, including this one, are increasingly more influential than the likes of the BBC and so on. My last question, Sameh. The American election is also going to be powerfully affected by this genocide in Gaza, isn't it?
Indeed, you know what Netanyahu is trying to do is to prolong it, to wait Trump and his son-in-law to be back into the White House, so he can maybe like do his deal of the century, try to kick the people of Gaza to Egypt and to completely ethnically cleanse Palestinians, also in the West Bank, because it's not only about Gaza, it's the long-term vision of Israel, particularly that fascist Netanyahu is to kick and to drive Palestinians out. This is very clear. You know, almost 8 ceasefires now, 8 deals were declined by Netanyahu. He even did not care, and he doesn't care about the Israelis who are in the Gaza Strip, hostages in the Gaza Strip. He even killed them. He sent his forces to kill them. So Netanyahu is interested in prolonging the conflict to get more support when Trump is back to office. And even if Trump is not back, he will still rely on the support on both parties. We know how strong the Israel lobby on both sides of the American Congress and in the Senate. We've seen how he's trying to rally support. We've seen how even like Biden said we're gonna stop sending arms to Israel, and the arms are still flowing into Israel. So the Netanyahu government is relying heavily in the Israel lobby, whether at this stage with Biden or his friend who's going to come soon, Trump.
Sameh Habeeb, Palestinian born in Gaza, seems like a choice that many people might make in your constituency. Thanks for joining us. Let's go to Wales, to Ray Higginson in Bridgend. Ray, welcome.
Hello, George. Nice to speak to you face to face for the first time. My question is regarding Palestine and Israel. Are there any lessons that can be learned from similar situations in, for example, South Africa, Northern Ireland, Algeria, that could possibly help with the peace process?
Well, of course, I hope that that is the case. And I had a guest on Moats, Arab Barghouti, the son of Palestine's Nelson Mandela, Marwan Barghouti, making precisely that point just the other night. And of course, I hope that there can be the same kind of process of truth and reconciliation that there has been in South Africa, in Israel-Palestine. But I have to say I doubt it, because the power imbalance is such that we are a long way away from Israel being forced to the negotiating table truly and sincerely, with a view to organizing a shift, a change, like we saw in South Africa. And here's the point that people don't want to hear. The Boers in South Africa negotiated the end of apartheid because they had been defeated. They were defeated between the hammer of the African National Congress and its armed wing, Mkhonto and Sizwe. I'm proud to have been associated for many decades with both. They were defeated between that hammer and the anvil of almost absolute boycott, divestment, sanctions, ostracism. It became a very filthy thing to do, to be doing business with South Africa. We are not at that stage yet with Israel. They still retain the commanding heights of all the Western governments, all of them, even ones that have rebelled, like Hungary, for example, has rebelled on the Ukraine front, but it is a slavish supporter, fanatic supporter of Israel. So all the Western governments remain fully behind Israel. All of the media in the Western world, television and print, is behind Israel. And a substantial number of our fellow citizens remain sympathetic to Israel. Even if they don't like Israel, they hate Muslims. They hate people of color. They see the Palestinian children that are being slaughtered as something other than them, even less than them, even sub them. And so until the balance of power is closer to what it was towards the end of apartheid, and I was there, remember, I was literally there, underground, in apartheid South Africa, working for the African National Congress. I saw apartheid begin to crumble and fall, and just before it fell in toto, the Boers decided to negotiate a settlement, released Mandela, had a negotiation, and tried to make the best deal that they could. Israel is not nearly at that stage yet, and the Palestinians are not nearly at the stage that the African National Congress reached just before the end of apartheid. Now, let's go to Northern Ireland again, where my old friend Fra Hughes, a veteran of these affairs, man who has traveled with me and under his own steam to Gaza many times. Fra, welcome.
Thank you very much. Mr. Galloway, it's always a privilege to speak with you, and I'd like to wish you good luck to you and your party in the upcoming elections. In my opinion, the only part of the contrived peace proposal put forward by the American administration at the UN Security Council, which the Israeli Security Council truly wishes to see implemented, is the release of their hostages, because the only sustained pressure Netanyahu is under internally from those demanding the release of the captives. The war criminals, now in a genocidal cabinet, want to oversee the total destruction of Gaza. They do not want peace with the Palestinians. They want another piece of Palestine. If you agree that Israeli society, of which 70% in polls appear to want more death and destruction visited upon the civilian population of Gaza and the West Bank, who are represented by an ever-expanding right-wing cabal of fundamentalist settlers now in government, ceasefire or not, history, alongside the events currently unfolding, shows Israeli society covets all of Palestine and a bit more, proving that peace, as proposed in the current peace talks, is an illusion. Mr. Galloway, what will a real lasting peace look like in the region to you? And more importantly, how will it materialize in our lifetime?
Well, first of all, it's not at all certain that it will materialize in our lifetime. Certainly not mine. Hopefully yours as a younger man. But I basically deny the phrase peace process. There is no peace process. For a long time, there was lots of process, but no peace. A process that was deliberately elongated and circular. And all the while that process was taking place, not only was there no peace, but settlements were being built on the peace of Palestine, namely the West Bank, that was supposed to be the end goal of the process. Oslo, as you know, envisaged a separation of Israel and Palestine, with a mini Palestinian state on 22 or 23% of Palestine, in which the refugees in Lebanon, that we both know well, and in Syria and in Jordan would never be able to return, and all the Palestinian people would be 22% of Palestine. Even the UN foundational resolution that led to the creation of Israel was a 50-50 split. So half and more than half had been lost in the Oslo agreements. But in that endless process, 800,000 new Israeli settlers are now in the West Bank. And I always make this point, Fra, you can back me up. The idea that these are settlements, i.e., wooden cottages or rolled wagons or tents. These are cities. These are gleaming towers, high-rise buildings, swimming pools, sprinklers, lawns. These are cities, these so-called settlements. And they're not going to leave. And so there is actually, physically, no place to put a Palestinian mini-state, even if Israel was minded to agree to the creation of one. So you and I think, have a vision of one state from the river to the sea, in which Jews, Muslims, Christians live as equal citizens under the law. Now, people say that's not attainable. Israel will never agree to that. Maybe so. But the alternative is not attainable either. And moreover, even if it was attained, would not solve the problem. Wouldn't solve the problem of the refugees, millions of them, having no right of return, which is their legal right. Wouldn't possibly accommodate a Palestinian state unless you got 800,000 settlers out of it and stopped them from blowing up all the houses that they had built, blowing up the roads that they had built. And then there's the question of Gaza. As anyone who's looked at the map knows, Gaza and the West Bank are not connected, not contiguous in diplomatic speech. So the idea originally was, well, maybe there'll be a tunnel, like the Channel Tunnel, which will connect the West Bank and Gaza, maybe even a bridge. But who has any confidence about the safety of that bridge, that tunnel? And that Gaza is now completely destroyed. And they are planning on driving out 2 million Palestinians from Gaza. They're auctioning off the beachfront property. So that's a long way of saying it's far too early to talk about peace. It's far too early to talk about negotiation and peace processes like Algeria, like Ireland, like South Africa, and so on. The balance of power in the region will have to substantially change before any possibility of a meaningful peace agreement will arise. Fra, as always, thank you so much. Let me go to Mexico. Who wouldn't want to go to Mexico? Charles Stanyan in Mexico, most welcome. Go ahead, Charles.
Hello. Good morning. Good morning, George, and thank you for having me on again. I wanted to talk about Gaza because that's all my mind can think about these days and the suffering there. And do you think within Israel rejecting every permanent ceasefire and determined to wipe out every last Palestinian, is there any possibility that the Houthis, the Hezbollah, Hamas, and possibly even Iran somehow do a full-blown attack on Israel and bring an end to this genocide, and possibly bring an end to Israel as a hostile state? Is that a possibility?
It's a definite possibility, but the other way around, it's Israel that is, within the next hours, perhaps, about to launch a full-scale war against Lebanon. And if they launch a full-scale war against Lebanon, and I've seen many of those, I've been there during many of those, then the events will spin incalculably out of control. And that could lead to the even wider conflagration that you infer with your question. The Israeli army has been strengthened with the reservists, moved up to the northern frontier. The north of Palestine is uninhabited now, except by Israeli military. I mean, Hezbollah has effectively taken at least 15% of Israeli territory already. They've already liberated it because no Israeli can live there. And they've all evacuated out of there. And their place has been taken by an Israeli military that Hezbollah is daily taking attrition from. So if Israel invades Lebanon, Hezbollah will undoubtedly invade Palestine. They will take the Galilee. They will have a situation where the flag will fly over the Galilee. And the war will ebb and flow. And if it is confined to Hezbollah versus Israel, Hezbollah will win, as they have won twice before in defeating the Israeli armed forces. But of course, the danger is, as your question infers, that rather than lose, Israel will either A, have recourse to its secret, illegal nuclear weapons, either battlefield weapons for the Northern Front, or even perhaps a strategic missile attack on neighboring countries. Anything could happen. Before that could happen, the Americans might well intervene to stop that happening. They might say, well, if we don't intervene now on Israel's side, then Israel might fire nuclear weapons, and then we might be into World War III. So at that stage, the United States might, as they have done many times before, land the Marines on the beach in Damour, in Beirut. That might very well happen. I advise them against it because the Lebanese now are not the same as the Lebanese before when the Marines were landed. The Lebanese are more than happy to defend their country against anyone, even and perhaps especially, including America. So it would be very unwise of Western countries to get involved in a war between Lebanon and Israel, but they might well do so because they do lots of ill-advised things, which is a long way of saying I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. All I can tell you is the air is thick with the idea that Israel is about to invade Lebanon. They want to drive Hezbollah and the other resistance forces north beyond the Litani River, which is kind of where I came in. You know this? In 1977, when I first went to Lebanon, the Israelis had controls at the Litani River. When it got to 1982, they took over Beirut and they presided over the Sabra and Shatila massacres with General Sharon standing on the roof with the Israelis shining searchlights into the camp so that the beasts of fascism, the Kateb, could go house to house murdering women and children. So they've always had a thing about the Litani River. So now it's back. They are demanding Hezbollah withdraw north of the Litani so that their missiles cannot reach Tel Aviv. I've got double news for them. First of all, Hezbollah rockets can reach Tel Aviv from wherever they are situated. And secondly, the resistance will not withdraw. As the leadership of Hezbollah said yesterday, the Israelis will not be given at the negotiating table that which they are unable to take on the battlefield. Syed Jafar is in London next. Syed, welcome, sir. What would you like to say?
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, good. Thank you.
Good, good. George, I have a series of things to really put out there, and I'd like to start in a certain way. Hopefully, I don't take up too much of your time. The first one is, how on earth have the world become subservient to a state that is like a dot on the earth? I mean, I need to just get your view on that initially. I mean, you know, the UK, to be honest, has colonized most of the world. Most of the world is still kind of following UK rules and stuff locally. But how is it that there's such a global hold that Israel have got with the global states being subservient? What's your view on that? So that's my first question. Do you want to do a question by question, or should I just put all my questions out there?
We've only got time for one more. Give me another one more.
Okay, so that's the first one. And the second question I had was, why has the leverage Israel have from the Balfour Treaty, which I've read up and I've looked at the Sykes and Picot and all that sort of stuff, and you know, it was, you're supposed to honor and look after the locals, right? That was the idea behind this migration of moving these European Jews. Let's just call them European Jews for a minute into a Middle Eastern land. Why did that? Why did the terms of the Balfour break? Because they've not honoured the local people. So the Europeans have come into our land, if you like. When I come to England, I honour my English neighbours and I buy them Christmas cards. When these guys have come in to our lands, they've not honoured our people as per the terms of Balfour. But why is it that they've got this increased leverage that they can effectively, I don't know how to put it in a polite fashion, they can take the mickey. That's as polite as I can make it.
Okay, we'll try and translate that for international viewers. It means make a fool, trick the local people. Both those questions I can answer with one answer. On Saturday night, I was in the building in Cheetham Hill in Manchester, where the Balfour Declaration was signed by the Zionist side. Just along the road was the house and street where the leader of the Zionist movement at that time, Chaim Weizmann, actually lived. I won't identify the house because there are very good people living in it now. And in the neighbouring constituency of Wythenshawe in Manchester, the MP was Arthur Balfour, whose Balfour Declaration we're talking about. So it's not just Britain that's at the heart of this matter. It is Manchester that's at the heart of this matter. And I speak as a proud resident of Greater Manchester and Member of Parliament, hopefully again soon for a Greater Manchester constituency called Rochdale. So when people say, why are you talking about Palestine? Well, who but us, who were so intimately, deeply involved in the creation of this whole disaster, who, if not us, should be talking about it, should be doing something about it? But you do raise a vitally important point, which I've tried vainly for decades to raise. Everybody knows the first paragraph of the Balfour Declaration, but nobody reads, and if they read, they certainly don't heed the second paragraph, which says that nothing shall be done which will prejudice the rights of the existing population of Palestine. Well, everything that was done has prejudiced the rights and even the lives of the existing population. And you've got to believe, I do, that they knew that that would be so, but that because they had interests in the wider Arab world, they had relations, they were picking monarchs for Arab countries drawing borders for Arab countries in the Sykes-Picot conspiracy, which took place at exactly the same time. Britain and France were inventing countries and picking people to be the king of those countries, some of whom are still, their families are still the kings of those countries. And there are people in those countries who will die for the borders that were drawn by a British guy and a French guy. This fake nationalism of these small countries that were invented by the empire. So because they had these interests, they had to pretend that they could simultaneously implant a European colony in Palestine without sacrificing the interests of the existing population there. If they didn't know that that couldn't be done, they were too stupid to be involved in international politics. If they did know, but were pretending otherwise, then they're too wicked to have been involved in international politics. So we have a situation where Israel appears to be all-powerful in Western countries. There are 2 points that have to be made about that. First of all, Western countries are no longer nearly as powerful as they were. When we talk about the international community, the vast bulk of the international community is not in the West. Only 13% of the population of the world is in the West, and only 9% of the children in the world are children in the West. So the idea that what is decided in the West will rule the roost forever is fundamentally misplaced. I'll have to return to that at another time because I need to get to Dubai. Why wouldn't I? Where Ken Fernandez waits. Ken, you're the last caller. Let's hear from you.
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, good. Go ahead.
George,
we're very short of time.
Thank you so much. When last I had the benefit and honor of being on the show as a guest in this way, I raised the issue of the petition which I wrote addressed to the ICJ and also Interpol for the arrest of the war criminals in Tel Aviv. And ICJ, of course, having jurisdiction over both Israel and certain countries that support it.
I'm losing you, but I got your import. Am I going to pursue the Interpol arrest warrant on Netanyahu and Gallant? And am I going to seek to prosecute the decisions made by the International Court of Justice? There are no arrest warrants. All that talk that the chief prosecutor of the ICC, Mr. Khan, King's Counsel of England, that he was going to ask the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants. Where are they? Where are these arrest warrants? It was all faff. It was all propaganda. It wasn't even worth the paper that they weren't written on. There are no arrest warrants, and the International Court of Justice is being totally, completely ignored, contemptuously disregarded. Even the Security Council of the United Nations called for a ceasefire unanimously, with one abstention, Russia, which rightly didn't trust it. The United States' demand for a ceasefire is now the policy of the Security Council with the power of international law. Where's the ceasefire? You see a pattern here? All these international institutions are just lipstick on the pig of raw power. Israel does what it does because it has the power to do so. The United States does what it does because it has the power to do so. They prefer to dress it all up in the pretty paraphernalia of international this and international that, and world community that and world this, but it's all cosmetic. It's all camouflage. It's all cover. So yes, I'll be asking, if elected back for my 8th time in the British Parliament, where are these arrest warrants? Why did you say you were asking for arrest warrants and then shut your mouth thereafter? Why did not the ICC issue these arrest warrants? Why is Netanyahu able freely to travel to any country? Because there is no arrest warrant. Why did the ICJ gather in Ermine all of these august justices from around the world? Hear South Africa's case. Hear Israel's defense. Decide that a plausible case for genocide existed. Issue instructions to Israel to cease and desist and put Israel on trial for genocide. Why has that not happened? It's because these institutions were designed for others. They thought that only Africans or Yugoslavians or maybe the odd Muslim would end up in front of these international tribunals and end up in the cells specially kept in The Hague in the Netherlands. They never imagined that the day would come when it would be them that was on trial, and they simply cannot handle it. Do you know that the American government is in possession of a law called the Invasion of the Hague Act? It's American legal policy passed by the Congress instructing the president to invade the Netherlands should any American official or soldier end up on trial there. That would be something, wouldn't it? To see the United States parachute regiments or the Marines coming ashore in the Netherlands, fighting their way to The Hague and prizing open the bars and releasing Antony Blinken, who had been seized and was then on trial for crimes against humanity, for war crimes and for breaches of the Geneva Conventions. I can dream. You can dream. And if you're like me, a dreamer, be sure that we are not the only ones. We are millions, hundreds of millions, billions all over the world. And one day we shall prevail, God willing. Thanks for watching this Have It Out with Galloway. Spread the word about this show and get on this video wall just as soon as you can. Thanks very much for watching.